I'm here to talk to you about what we do at Guardian Books. And what I'm going to do in this presentation, I'm going to explain who we are. I'm also going to talk sort of through a case study of one of the books we've published, which I hope encapsulates what it is that we're trying to do by sort of marrying data with our editorial decision making, and then just sort of talk through a little bit about how that actually works practically and how we go about doing it. So, to introduce ourselves, as I'm sure you might well be aware, The Guardian is one of the UK's leading newspapers. This is its offices here. They are based here in King's Cross, in the heart of London. They're very nice and shiny and always lit up at night time because journalists are always working every hour of the day when they're not complaining and drinking, like Evan said. And this is broadly about the size of The Guardian for the purposes of this slide. I couldn't get the circle any bigger. What I want to illustrate is that, and this is not to scale, really we are much smaller, that The Guardian Books is a small publisher. We're a small company. But what I think we're trying to do, which is different, and it's entirely as a result of the fact that we are located within the broader Guardian building, is we have access to the wider environment of the Guardian newspaper. And that means sort of three real key things of access, points of access. We have access to a vast range of different writers. We also have access to an enormous audience, and these are just some of the sort of the headline statistics that belong to the paper and also to the bookshop that we run from our team as well. So there's 30 million monthly unique browsers. In the big events, US elections, Olympics, so on and so forth, that shoots north of 70 million. So I think it's record about 74 million. There's a print circulation, which is declining, of course, as the online user base grows. It's about 215,000. Importantly, we have a global audience as well, and I'm sure you'll hear throughout the day, and I'm sure you're well aware of the sort of the opening up of boundaries that the digital world brings us. The problems this brings around territoriality and so on, but the opportunities it brings to find readers and to find an audience, no matter where they're based in the world. So the Guardian newspaper audience, about a third of them are based in the UK. This is sort of specifically the online audience. About a third are based in the US, and then the final third scattered around English-speaking populations in the world. There's a huge amount of sort of reaching out to that audience through social media, through the different ways the newspaper is published, both online, through apps, through social platforms such as Facebook. And then there's the bookshop as well. I mentioned it's an online bookshop. Now, these are very high figures, some of them, in particular the website visitors. They're very useful to be able to sort of communicate with this audience as a book publisher. But essentially, these kind of figures are they're kind of the equivalent of sales figures. And what I mean by that is they are just straightforward measurements of a single factor. And they're very useful, but what's more important to us, and our third point of access, is the data that we're able to make use of behind these figures. Now, Guardian Books has been around for about 10 years. Within the Guardian newspaper, and we've been using those first kind of figures, those popularity figures, ever since the imprint was started. And about 6 years ago or so, based on what was a knowledge of what was popular amongst the paper's readership, we published this book. This was a printed book, full color, sort of quite large hardback, and it was all about swimming in places like this. This is the first time I've shown this slide, and I hope that some of the audience might sort of understand the whatever it is that drives people. And I have been swimming in this myself, and I can attest to just how very cold it is. Drives people to go swimming in very, very cold water. So this is an old quarry somewhere in the heart of England with murky green water, but we knew it was popular amongst the readership, and the book went on to sell to a few tens of thousands of British families who all like doing this at a weekend. But what we're trying to do now, we've been using this popularity data, we're now trying to construct more of a story, and that's what from the data, and that's what we're doing with Guardian Shorts. Now, what I mean by to introduce Guardian Shorts first, sorry, Guardian Shorts are a series of ebook only. As Evan said, you can call them short form non-fiction or long form journalism, depending on, to be honest, depending on which background you come from. So I call them short form non-fiction. But what we're trying to do with the story we're trying to get out of data is we're no longer just taking the simple popularity factors. Of course, we're including them in our analysis, but we are asking questions of that data, and we're relating that data to other understandings that we have of the audience. So we have a bunch of metrics that define how the audience engages with the content. We have a great understanding of how they're behaving on the website, and a team of sort of very talented data analysts throw that all together, and they're able to take from that much, much deeper, richer, more targeted and more focused understandings of what it is that people want. And we're able to build up that kind of story that allows us to understand what it is that people might be wanting, and then we try and apply that narrative to our editorial decision making. And we have sort of three key questions that we ask ourselves. I mean, this is fairly straightforward, I'm sure. There's which subject areas should we be focusing on? We also ask ourselves, what should that content be? And then the more conventional, how big is the potential audience, who they are, and whereabouts we can reach them. And sorry, I should have said as well, in the data that we have that we throw into everything, as well as all the behavioral data of how people behave on the website, how they engage, and so on and so forth, we also have a lot of data about who these people are, what kind of devices they own, where they're located, what time they like reading. We're able to answer some of those questions that Tova mentioned in the introduction that we should all be asking of readers. So to introduce just a bit of the range in the Guardian short series and to explain where it's come from and where it's going now, I've circled here, these are some of, just straightforwardly, the most popular areas on the Guardian website. News, of course, sport, culture, travel, and technology. And we have various titles that we've developed in all of those fields. Now, everything on this slide, with the exception of Facts Are Sacred, which I'm going to talk to you about in a little more detail, and also with the exception of the Libya title there, these are all from really within the first sort of 12 months of the Guardian short series. The series is now just coming up to about 1.5 years old. And what we did at first, we have nearly 60 titles, partly to build a sort of a critical mass in the series, to give ourselves a lot of content very quickly. Also because we had some sort of particular subject areas of great interest that we knew were going to be popular with the audience. The sports ones have done very well. The Guardian was, a couple of years ago in the UK, it played a large part in uncovering the nefarious access of people's voicemail in what's the phone hacking scandal, which has now led to a big debate about press regulation in the UK. And that was a story that we felt our readers would be more interested in. We took a lot of the archive content from The Guardian. Now, The Guardian and Observer together have an archive that goes back to 1791, I think. There's a lot of content in there. And we were with a little editorial work as well, able to curate that content into short packaged ebooks. What we're trying to do now in the series, and why I've picked up Facts Are Sacred, is we're trying to move beyond curating archive content, and we're trying to move into using the stories, the data stories that we have, to commission new content, and to not just commission a particular title or a particular subject area, but to try and bring that extra tool, that extra qualifier into how we go about structuring the book itself, and really make it work at every stage of the editorial decision-making process. Just to show you what Facts Are Sacred are about, it is about data. It's about data journalism in particular. data journalists do things like this. This is a map of the world in chocolate, showing the biggest importers and exporters. They also worked on the WikiLeaks cables that were released to The Guardian and to Der Spiegel in Germany, and they were the first people to really analyze those and look at the stories behind them. So this is the task that we set ourselves when we were commissioning Facts Are Sacred. We wanted to know, could we decide what the content should be? And we looked at how people were engaging with the data blog. And now the reason we chose that the data blog, the Guardian data blog is the home of data journalism. The reason we chose this to develop into a book is because it has a monthly audience of 1 million unique users, which is very high, but there's certainly more popular areas on the website. But we knew that there was a very engaged audience there. And we looked at the type of things they were interested in. We tried to analyze not just that they were interested in maps of chocolate and so on and so forth, but what was it that was keeping them coming back? Why were they engaged? How were they responding to that content? And so we built up a series of 8 chapters responding to their desire to understand how it was done, to understand whether they could do it themselves, to look at how it was changing what the role of a journalist is, to how it was changing what the role of a newspaper is, from reporting, analysis, comment, to being a bridge into the raw data sets and presenting them in new, different, imaginative, visual, interactive ways. So we built that up. We worked with the author, who is the editor of the data blog, an author called Simon Rogers. And we then decided to evaluate whether it was a properly commercial proposition. So we looked at the size of the audience, how we were going to reach them and so on. And to do this was perhaps more straightforward market analysis, but we were able to use our understanding of the engagement that people were showing to sort of predict a figure that we thought was reasonable that we might be selling. And we had the 1 million users, but if we were just taking that and thought we'd sell 1 million ebooks, it would be wonderful. We set ourselves a much more realistic figure. We knew that 10% of those audience were what we called engaged. That gave us a figure of 100,000, and we knew that 23% of those owned an e-reading device, which narrowed it down quite a bit. We knew that 78% of those lived in either the UK or the US, and that at the moment is where the vast majority of our book sales are, our ebook sales. So we focused in on them, and we also knew, we'd done some market research, 27% of them, which has taken it down to now quite a low figure, had indicated that they were interested in reading short-form content in one form or another. We also knew from all the archive content that we'd published by that time that about 50% of our sales were coming from not core Guardian readership. So just shy of 10,000 was what we thought would be a realistic figure to aim for. We are learning as we do this, we're experimenting, we're developing, we're making our decision-making more sophisticated and increasing the influence that data has on our decision-making all the time. So we decided to give ourselves something realistic to aim for, and we've sold 7,000 copies so far. I have no doubt that we would go on to sell the 10,000. It's actually, that ebook is no longer available for sale because we're developing it into different platforms and different editions. So that was the final sales target we achieved, and we felt pretty happy with it. We also felt that it was a very useful proof of what we were trying to demonstrate to ourselves, really, as well as to demonstrate to our colleagues at the newspaper and our colleagues elsewhere in publishing, that we could take this deeper analysis of how people were responding to the newspaper content and use that to inform the decision-making that we were employing for book content. So we'd thrown an awful lot of stuff into it. That's just sort of a scattering of a few of the bits and pieces. And these are the two editions that it's now being developed into. They are published next month. It's stepping out of what was just a sort of very straightforward black and white ebook form into a much more beautiful full color printed book, which has all the maps of chocolate and so on in. There's also an ebook as well, which is developed for the iPad, much more appropriate in a way to the type of content, full of videos, and all the other bits and pieces that we knew the audience was interested in, especially interactive elements where they can put in their date of birth and be delivered a chart as to what the world was like when they were born, where they can play with different tables, where they can get it involved with the data themselves, that we had no way of supplying in just a straightforward EPUB title. So those are both coming out next month. And on the printed side in particular, and linking that back to the bookshop, I just sort of wanted to show that we have a complete circle when it comes to data. So as well as looking at things from an editorial point of view, there's the sales and there's the marketing point of view as well. And Tova mentioned this very well indeed, and she highlighted the examples of people saying, you've read this, you will like this, you've read this, please God, don't read this. And what we've been doing is using that similar kind of marketing data, sales data analysis to try and match up where we've got to with our editorial decision making and make sure that we then go on using data throughout every stage of the publishing process to bring it to the right audience, to advertise it to the right people. And The Guardian, as well as being a newspaper, there are other commercial enterprises there selling everything from luxurious holidays to pairs of slippers. And that gives us a lot of sort of commercial profiling of our customers and of our readership as well. So we're able to match up where we can identify the characteristics of book buyers who have not yet bought a book, or of book buyers who we know are interested and are showing an engagement with similar content. What I do want to say is that this, by the way, is that's the best I could do for my representation of myself in a Guardian sort of blobby figure. What lies at the heart of this all of this is, of course, the editor. When I mention editorial decision making and I mention data together, it's still the editor who's making that decision. The data, without someone to make use of it, is just, it's an enormous spreadsheet of numbers. And even when they are, the different metrics are put together to create the insight that we have, unless we know what to do with it, unless we try and interrogate it, unless we ask it specific questions, unless we have a specific goal in mind that we want to get to, it remains a very big spreadsheet full of numbers, and that does not help us tell stories. So the editor remains absolutely central, and that includes all of the traditional editorial skills and talents that everybody in this room has. So when that comes to, working with authors, when that comes to deciding exactly how something should be written, we don't let the data dictate to us what it is we're doing. We use it to inform our decision making. We use it to help our understanding. And we use it as a tool, much as an editor will take on all sorts of different pieces of understanding about a market, about a book, about an author, about the subject matter, to influence that commissioning decision in the first place. The data that we are using about our readers just becomes another one of those tools. It does not take primacy. It does not try and set out exactly what we should be publishing. It just allows us to make slightly wiser, slightly more informed decisions when it comes to it. So it is an experiment, I think. We've been going, as I said, for nearly a year and a half now. And at the beginning of this year, we made a conscious switch, having seen partly a lot of the sales results coming through from the original titles, to commission many more original titles, to move away, I suppose, to slightly wean ourselves off the archive material. So it's an exciting year ahead. We have a bunch of titles which are being written at the moment. I hope sort of out there's a collection of authors all very hard at work. And all of those titles have come from an understanding that these are things that our audience, we believe, will respond to. And I should say as well, it's not just a case of going to the data first, analysing, and then going out to commissioning. We do also use the data we have to respond to pitches, to use it to evaluate how commercially appropriate, how editorially appropriate a particular title might be. Now, of course, I know that we're lucky to be part of The Guardian, to have access to their data analysts, to have access to their software that makes it all possible, and to have access to the audience that supplies us with everything we need in the first place. But data is absolutely everywhere. Jonas spoke about metadata, and books are swathed in metadata, from cover image to genre to the blurb on the back, price, ISBN. A book is more data points than you can probably begin to imagine. And as different digital distribution opportunities come to rise, it gives us a greater and greater opportunity to gather further bits of data. One thing that is in the plans for the next year in the Guardian, next year in the life of the Guardian short series, is to not just use the data to commission, but to develop how we distribute those titles. At the moment, they are ebooks distributed through the major retailers, but something like The Atavist is, I think, a wonderful way of, if you can build that direct relationship with readers, that gives you an awful lot of leverage when it comes to selling to them, when it comes to communicating with them. If you have that direct relationship, and it also allows you to understand how they're reading your books. You can get data coming straight back to you from the books themselves. Almost like Joe said at the beginning with that hardback book that's had sensors put into its spine. It's infinitely easier to do, and it is scalable when it comes to digital. And it's about finding ways to get hold of that data. It's not always the easiest thing to get hold of, but if you can develop channels that feed back to you as well as you feeding out to your readers, then it can prove to be enormously valuable. So I just want to finish with a few bullet points there. We have a motto that runs through the entire Guardian, in that they are digital first. And I think the principle of being data first is enormously important to book publishers. Print books are still by far and away the biggest part of the market, but we can use their digital counterparts to get data back, to influence them. We can also use data to influence commissioning decisions around printed books. It doesn't have to be digital books at all. Data is a tool. It's not anything more than a tool. It's a very good tool, and it's a tool that editors shouldn't be without. But it does need organising and interpreting. Just a vast swathe of numbers coming back at you isn't going to help anybody, and it's probably going to drown an awful lot of sensible decision making. So you should use the data to prove your assumptions, but you should also allow it to change your mind. And not every decision we make based on data leads to a great selling book. If we crack the formula for a best-selling book, we'd be delighted. It's not happened just yet. It would solve all the problems, like difficult second novels and so on and so forth. So if something doesn't sell like we expect it to, we will go back to that data and we will ask it the same questions again, and we'll bring in our fresh understandings. And we will hope that next time, if we think we've got a good idea, we will have a more sophisticated understanding of that data, and we will allow it to change our minds. And that is me. Thank you very much.